Back again for a little Losers Club by Andrew Clements. We are on chapter 27. It's called No More Bets. And in my book, that chapter starts on page 180. So go ahead and open up. It was lunchtime on Wednesday, and Alec realized that in the excitement about the 3 new girls who had shown up yesterday, he had forgotten to tell the other club members about his kickball bet with Kent. So he found Nina and told her. She stared at him. "You're kidding, right?" Alex shook his head. "No, he's really coming. We made a bet that if I could score 1 run during that kickball game, then he had to join our club for 5 days, starting today, this afternoon." "I can't believe you did that right after I told you how I didn't want to see him anymore." Nina thought a second, then asked, "But what's he going to do?" "Same thing we all do, read. That was part of the bet, and I get to choose which book." "Oh," then with a devilish smile she said, "you should make him read Lily's Ice Princess book." Alec was glad to see a smile, but he quickly said, it really ought to be a book he'll like. Nina scrunched up her face thinking, "So a sports story?" Alex shook his head. "Something he probably wouldn't choose on his own." Nina scowled. "But what if he sits at the table with a book open and won't read, all stubborn and mean? It would be just like him to do something like that, to sit there and tease everybody for 5 full whole days." Alex shrugged. "That could happen, but I don't think it will." Then he told Nina the way he had offered to call off the bet after he'd won it, and how Kent had said no. "Wow," she said. "Yeah, I was surprised too. But he was totally," Alec paused, looking for the right word, and then he found it. "He was totally honorable." Nina snorted. "Kent? Honorable? I won't believe that till I see it." Pretending to be serious, Alex said, "So, would you like to make a bet about it?" "No," Nina said. "No more bets." Chapter 28, Jerk Proof. After the final bell on Wednesday, Alec rushed to the gym so he could be the first to arrive at the club table. He looked around, trying to figure out where to fit 8 kids, 6 more than he had ever imagined being there. But he didn't have much time for imagining. Kent showed up less than a minute later with a scowl on his face and a chip on his shoulder. "So, can I sit wherever I want?" "Well, Nina usually sits at the far end over there, and this is where I usually sit. And Jason," Kent interrupted. Okay, just look at the magical seating chart inside your head and tell me where to sit." "There," Alex said, and he pointed to a spot across from him but a couple of feet from the end of the table. That way, Kent wouldn't be looking across the table at Nina or sitting next to Jason. Alec was suddenly glad to have all those 4th grade girls to spread around the table too, like insulation between positive and negative wires, good for preventing sparks or explosions. Kent sat down with a heavy thump, and his weight shook the whole table, which he clearly enjoyed. He said, "So, are you going to hook me up with a book, or do I have to just sit here like an idiot?" Alec was glad Nina hadn't arrived, because this was exactly what she had predicted. It was the same old Kent, not the honorable warrior from yesterday who had insisted that he wanted to stick to the conditions of their bargain. But since his talk with Nina, Alec had been busy. Right after lunch, he dashed to the school library before social studies. He arrived at the front desk out of breath. "Hi, Mrs. Haddon. This guy I know, he's kind of a jerk, and he thinks reading is stupid. So I have to find something he'll like, even if he tries not to." The librarian smiled. "In my business, we don't call them jerks. We call them reluctant readers. And there are lists and lists of books for kids like that. What grade is he in?" After Alec had answered, she tapped on her keyboard a moment, peered at the screen, and then turned it so he could see it too. "This is an excellent list. Surefire, can't miss books. I know you've read a lot of these, so just pick one. I guarantee that these books are jerk-proof." She was right. He had read all the books in the top 20 on this list, and one of them jumped out at him. It was such an obvious choice that he should have been able to pick it out without help. He pointed at the screen and said, "This one. Is there a copy I can check out today, like right now?" Mrs. Haddon did have a copy available, and that was the book Alex slid across the table to Kent. He looked at the cover illustration. "Oh, great. A book about an axe murderer? Thanks a lot." Alec almost laughed, but he kept his stony face, his eyes serious. "Listen, you're the one who said you wanted to keep your word, and the deal is that you sit there and keep quiet and read the book I give you. So either get up and leave or shut up and read." Kent started to reply, but then clamped his face into a frown, opened the book, and started reading. As the other 6 kids showed up, Alec motioned that everyone needed to stay quiet. When he put his finger to his lips and shook his head at Julia Hampton, she immediately rushed around the table and whispered in his ear, "But you said we could talk about our book." Alec whispered back, "Yes, but you all have to read the book first, right? So today is a reading-only day." Julia accepted that logic and went and whispered to Sarah and Ellen, and then all 3 of them settled down to read. They each had a brand new paperback of a book Alec had never seen, something about cats and dogs. After 15 minutes or so, Alec glanced up and caught Nina looking at him. She secretly pointed toward Kent, who was sitting there being completely true to his word. And Nina didn't try to hide her amazement. Then she smiled at Alec and silently mouthed the words, "Perfect book." Alec smiled back and nodded in agreement. And sneaking his own quick look, Alec was amazed too, because Kent sat motionless, eyes locked on the page, reading that book with the same intensity he'd have used to pitch a kickball with the bases loaded. And why not? Like the librarian said, some books are guaranteed jerk-proof, and Hatchet was a genuine winner. Chapter 29, Adjustments. The Losers Club had a problem. It was Thursday afternoon, and the new girls were unbearably noisy, even when they were supposedly reading. They whispered and teased and giggled and kept telling each other about favorite little bits they found in their book. The 3 girls bothered everybody, especially Kent, who was still trying to hide how much he was into Hatchet. He kept growling and frowning, mostly at Julia and Sarah, who sat on either side of him. But the girls ignored him and everyone else, and their annoying chatter didn't let up. And this was why Alec had to spend his first 40 minutes of extended day tracking down Mrs. Case over in the cafeteria, getting permission to have a second table for the Losers Club, returning to the gym to okay that with Mr. Wilner, and then walking over to the cafeteria with him to help roll one of the big folding lunch tables back to the gym. Steering the table into the gym near the active games corner, Alec noticed that the kickball kids seemed to be getting along fine without Kent. There was a lot more laughing and goofing around. Instead of 3 regulation-sized teams, they had 2 larger teams. They were just playing for fun, and everyone was loving it. As he pushed the table closer to the back wall, Mr. Wilner asked, "Do you want this one next to the first?" "No," Alex said quickly. "This table's for the kids who want to talk about their books. So, like, maybe 20 feet along the west wall. Is that okay?" "Sure," he said. "There's lots of room." By the time the 3 girls were settled at the new table, it was almost 4 o'clock. Alec could tell that Lily, Jason, Nina, and Kent were relieved to have the 3 chatterheads a safe distance away, and so was he. Alec was ready to start Brian's Hunt, the only book in the Hatchet series that he hadn't read. He wanted to be sort of an expert on the whole set in case Kent ever wanted to talk about them. He didn't really think that would happen, but he was going to be ready anyway. He did know one thing that was going to happen for sure. Kent was going to finish Hatchet very soon. He had looked over Kent's shoulder a few minutes earlier, and he was on page 155. Alec pushed everyone else out of his thinking and began to read, and his new novel did not disappoint. Brian's Hunt picked up a few years after Hatchet, and from the start, Alec couldn't turn the pages fast enough. The dangers of being alone in the wilderness were similar, but this story quickly became a true life and death contest. Around 5:15, Kent stood up and tossed his copy of Hatchet so that it hit the table with a loud smack. Startled, Alec looked at him. Kent said, "I'm finished, so I'm heading back over to kickball. Still time for a couple of quick games today. That okay with you?" Alec didn't blink. "Sure, except that wasn't what we agreed. You said you would stay 5 days, not just till you finished one book. But if you really can't deal with sticking around, it's fine. Totally up to you." Jason, Nina, and Lily stopped reading, and they looked at Kent. He put a smirk on his face and sat back down. "I can deal with anything. So, what now, boss?" Alec reached into his backpack, pulled out a copy of The River, and slid it across the table. "The book you just finished? That story keeps going." That was all he said, and he wasn't sure if it would be enough. But half an hour later, when Alec glanced up, he saw that same hungry look in Kent's eyes, that same total concentration. He was deep inside the story, and for the second time in 2 days, Alec felt like he was witnessing a small miracle. And that's the end of that chapter.